I'm a feminist, but when I clicked on a link to read a review of Women and Power, a Manifesto by Mary Beard, I got distracted by an ASOS advert for a red carpet, indecent, sequin shoulder pad midi dress, bought it and forgot to go back to the book. I still do not own Women and Power, a Manifesto by Mary Beard.
I don't even know what there were some words in the middle that there could have been another language.
An ASOS advert for...
No, I understand what an ASOS advert is.
I'm just going to give myself a run-up.
What is a MIDI?
A MIDI is not a mini and not a maxi.
Oh, fucking hell.
It's just below the knee.
I don't feel like that's helped that much.
It's a dress just below the knee. That's what it was called. That's what it was called. You go.
I'm a feminist, but my 2-year-old son calls Weetabix pick a bitch. And I've done nothing to correct him. I think it's better than the original name. I think it should be the name of an app that people can use to help them find a new bully.
I'm a feminist, but when I realised, after I had purchased it, the ASOS advert was, in fact, not for a red carpet, indecent, sequin shoulder pad midi dress, but that it was a red carpet, iridescent, sequin shoulder pad midi dress, I decided I wanted it less. I thought it said indecent, and I couldn't see any way in which it was indecent, but I just thought it was a hot name.
No, yeah, I like the idea.
It was a sexy name, and I thought, I'll be in the sequined indecent dress at this Christmas party.
And it wasn't indecent, it was, did you say iridescent?
So it's shiny.
You know so much about this sort of shit, actually. I meant to ask you before this started, but is there anything out there, like makeup-wise, for winter pink here? It's just kicked in today. Does anyone else get this on a couple of proud woos? My face can stay quite pale, but I get a very glowing... I get a winter pink here.
I will sort you out with some touche éclat.
Touche éclat.
Touche éclat.
That also sounds like you've won an argument. A touche éclat, my friend. I'm a feminist, but when I walk past chip shops, I mouth breathe. I wasn't sure whether to put this in, so I didn't know how unfeminist it was, but I think a real feminist would just have chips every time they want chips. But the problem is there's a chippy at the end of my road and I always want chips. And the only way to not go in is to not really experience the shop in any aesthetic of it. I don't just mouth breathe, I look away. For other pedestrians, I'm a hazard.
I'm a feminist, but... as happy as I was that Jacinda Ardern became Prime Minister of New Zealand last week, because it's so wonderful for her and women and feminism, I also thought, 37, is that not putting pressure on the rest of us for our careers? Could you not have waited till you were 42 or something decent? It's just too much. I'm sorry. No. 37. Running a whole country we've heard of at 37.
I mean... yeah.
That's all I'm saying.
Really popular country as well. Apologies in advance, this one's a bit long. I'm a feminist, but I had a really weird thing happen at a gig a couple of weekends ago. I was having a really lovely time at this gig, and there was a hetero couple in the front row, and about halfway through a 20-minute set, I asked if anyone in the room had also spawned, as in had children, and the woman in this couple said, yes, me. And I said, it's true, isn't it, what they say about it hurting? And she said, not for me. And I said, oh, was yours like an immaculate birth? Were you the mother of a deity? And she went, the mother of Satan, more like. Right, and I thought this was brilliant. So she then mumbled under her breath, I had a cesarean. But I was like, well, yeah, that's fine, but let's talk about this mother of Satan stuff, like how naughty are your kids? And then the bloke with her partner kept chipping in. Every time I went to talk to her, he kept chipping in, no, she had a cesarean. And I was like, thank you, sir. I was actually talking to her, right? And this went on and it went on, and he kept chipping in, right? She had a C-section, as if I hadn't understood what cesarean was. And so I said to him, look, thank you for your mansplaining, and that went down well. And he... was furious and said, I don't even, what is that? I'm just explaining to you the facts. I said, well, the thing is, I'm here to do comedy, not a TED Talk. The facts are irrelevant. But I said, but thank you ever so much for your help, Poppet, and mimed patting him on the head. Later on in my set, he was shaking so much with rage. And he had on a pink shirt, and I said, I can't concentrate because of how angry this man still is. And that went down well. And I said, you've gone the same colour as your blouse. And I moved on to another bit. Right? And then at this point, I thought I could see his table shuffling. And it's right at the front. It's a very small, intimate club. And he stood up. He's shaking with rage. And he stood up and he stood by the stage and said, you think it's so powerful up there, don't you, with a microphone from the stage? And he stormed out and he gave all the staff the V's. He flipped the bird to all the staff on the way out. And everyone was losing their minds. And it was fun, right? And it was fun. And I thought, what do you answer? And I did say, oh, gosh, I mean, I've really upset him. And we left it there. And I did say to it, I said, my favourite thing about this whole thing is how absolutely none fucks you give to his missus. And she was like, oh, he'll be fine. Anyway, that's not the end of the story, right? So it's the talk of the night, and then that's the end of that. Stand-up's a weird job, right? But then the next week, halfway through the week, I get an email from the woman who books the club, who's received a formal legal letter to her home address.
No.
The guy's a lawyer, and he's written to her saying that I physically assaulted him and that I turned gender stereotypes on their head like some sort of modern sexist. He called me Bernadette Manning.
Oh!
And said that I repeatedly mocked the difficulties that his wife had had in pregnancy and that I repeatedly hit him on the head.
What?
And what are they going to do about it? And this is why it's I'm a Feminist But. As part of the conversation, as part of the conversation I had with that booker, I offered to apologise.
Oh.
I really want to keep playing that club.
Oh, wow.
She said, absolutely no fucking way. Oh, yeah. They're awesome. The stand are amazing. Yeah. The stand are amazing. I said I've never had anything like that happen before, and she went, oh, we get that shit all the time.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Sorry it's so long.
No, I was gripped. I will do a final one, which is I'm a feminist, but when I saw Joe Brand on Have I Got News for You completely smash it in the viral clip that you will have all have seen, I thought this is great for feminism and it is great for women, but mainly, isn't it really nice to see Ian Hislop be 25% less smug for 60 seconds? That was my main thing. It was nice, though, because it has been some years. Live from King's Place in London, the Spontaneity Shop presents The Guilty Feminist with Deborah Frances-White and guest co-host Jess Fostekew and very special guest Joe Brand talking about Weinstein Culture, part MeToo. This is The Guilty Feminist, the podcast in which we explore our noble goals as 21st century feminists and the hypocrisies and insecurities which undermine them. Hello, Jess Fostekew.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm fine.
Have you had a guilty week or a feminist week?
Feminist week, I reckon, mainly. I have a #NastyWoman t-shirt, and I wore it to possibly one of the most beautiful places in the world for feminism, a Zumba class.
Oh.
Because #this girl can, if it involves a little bit of gentle dancing with a lot of beautiful women in their 80s and 90s. Grinding away, loving it. And an actual nasty woman was nasty to me about my #NastyWoman t-shirt.
Really?
And she just came up and went, oh, what a horrible t-shirt. And I was like, well, the thing is, actually, can I just say a minute? She was like, it's about to start. I was like, okay. And between every bloody song, I'd be like, excuse me, can I just... So it's a present, right? She'd be like, okay. And I was like, I don't really want to explain. And then in the end, I got actually, it's like this thing in America, like when Hillary was in the debates against Trump, and he called her a nasty woman just for having a good point, actually. And she went, well, I didn't get the reference. I think you're just wearing T-shirts. Is that the label you want for yourself, nasty woman? Oh, actually, you're the nasty woman because you judged me for my clothes at Zumba of all places, mate.
I think that's an odd thing to do.
Well, she just didn't get it. She thought I was walking around in a T-shirt that just said evil cunt. Do you know what I mean? It's just on a T-shirt that said, guys, big warning, I'm a horrible person. And actually, in her defence, that wouldn't be a particularly pleasant thing to watch someone wear.
Well, as that escalated.
And I've made myself sound like I came out of this really powerful. At the end of the class, I walked into the gym to fill out my water bottle and saw that she was at the water fountain and went, fuck that. And ran away.
Yeah, I know that feeling. We're probably going to talk about some other confrontations tonight because tonight we're doing Weinstein Culture Part MeToo. That's right, we've got a clever pun sequel title. So we did Weinstein Culture Part 1 when I was in Sydney, and we released that last week. And our guest tonight, very excitingly, is this week's feminist hero. If you saw Have I Got News For You, or in fact any of the viral clips, it's Jo Brand. I genuinely do feel that Jo Brand could not have come to a more appreciative, excited room for her Have I Got News For You actions. This is absolutely her core demographic for this week, because it was a remarkable thing, because I thought it was so direct and articulate and dignified, and what I loved about it is she didn't let them rush her, and she didn't go, oh, well, I think you'll find. She was so calm about it. I was very excited by it. Almost sexually so. Please welcome to the stage and make wonderful Guilty Feminist woohooing noises for Jessica Fostekew!
So, I don't think this necessarily has to be an uncomfortable and sad situation, everything that's happening now. I think it could be the start of something quite incredible, couldn't it? Something quite hopeful, exciting and exhilarating. Yes? Yeah, the start of big change. Powerful place after powerful place is being toppled by tidal waves of allegations exposing cultures of sleaze, harassment and worse. Will there be no important place, though, that it turns out doesn't have like a seedy undertummy? Like Hollywood, Westminster, where next? Guys, say a prayer for Hogwarts. There's no way Vernon Dursley isn't a fucking knee squeezer. And if it turns out Hagrid's the wrong un, that will actually break me. God. I need to eat my own soul. My money, if there's a sleaze bag in there, is actually on that sorting hat. That sort of power has got to corrupt, hasn't it? We just need to count ourselves lucky that JK isn't a little bit sillier, because we'd all be really panicking if she'd had it as sorting pants. So I said that bit to my partner last night and said, do you think it's silly enough? Do you think it's silly enough that they'll know it's a joke and they won't be all tense about it? And he said, yeah, I really enjoyed it up until the bit where he said sorting pants. And I was like, what about if I said sorting dildo? And he said, that's worse. That's much worse. I think we've got to be able to joke about this shit. I get a lot more done when I'm laughing than when I'm crying. But of course Westminster was next to be exposed as a sleazy place. It would have been so weird if it had been the one place that turned out not to have any of this scandal, wouldn't it? It would be like a plague had broken out and it turned out the only place that wasn't rife with it was in rats. Quentin Letts in the Mail described the House of Commons as a vortex of anguish. And you thought I was being a bit of a prick earlier, I think, with that Hogwarts bit. But tell me the following isn't an insanely plausible book title, Harry Potter and the Vortex of Anguish. That could well be the next one. But of course it's a vortex of anguish. I fucking love the idea that every creep everywhere is shitting themselves about being dug out. Ring, 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 ring.
Hello, Boris Johnson here. I don't suppose you've got any secret nuclear fallout shelters available? Yes, marvellous. How big is it? Is there room for my friend Woody Allen too? And his daughter? Oh, sorry, I mean wife.
I wondered where the hiss would come. And it was there. Tory MP Sir Roger Gale said that MPs were on hiding to nothing because allegations could be made which would be impossible to refute. Yes, and equally impossible to prove, you grisly, self-interested, tunnel-visioned head like a badly shaven nutsack. And he's called it a witch hunt, what's happening, all these allegations in Westminster now. What? A huge number of allegations being brought forward and being asked to be properly investigated and taken seriously. That does no damage at all to our, I agree, totally sacred rule of law, the presumption of innocence. That's just humans behaving in a way that's fair and wanting the best, isn't it? It's not a witch hunt, Mr. Roger MP for Thanet North, which was already where compassion went to die. It's not a witch hunt. That is a very loud knock on the door of an out-and-out coven. And now the door's finally been opened. It would be an insult to call you a neolith, Mr. Sir Roger Gale, because that period, 15,000 years before Christ was born, was actually an incredibly progressive time in terms of human development. And I don't want to tar those pioneers of early technology with the same brush as you. The Tory party wrote their first ever sexual harassment policy on Friday. Seriously. That even shocked me. It's 2017. Fuck my life. What have they fucking written it in? Hieroglyphs? They're the 90-year-old virgins of morals. They've never even been kissed by a moral. That's not behind the curve. That's never having seen a fucking curve. To the extent that the first time you do see a curve, of course you presume you're allowed to bloody touch it. Thank you.
I was thinking maybe before we did our challenges, because
Yeah.
they could create discussion fodder.
Yep.
I'm sort of too excited to wait any longer to
No,
bring
I
Jo
know.
Brand on.
Yes, please.
So, our guest today is nothing short of a national treasure. A leading light of the 80s stand-up comedy boom, she is also a novelist, screenwriter, actor, and trained psychiatric nurse. Please welcome Jo Brand! Jo Brand, so lovely to have you on the show.
It's great to be here.
Last week you were on Have I Got News For You, and you were the only woman on Have I Got News For You. You were hosting it, and there were sort of 4 white chaps around you. I heard it described in a newspaper as 3 public schoolboys and Paul Merton. And what was that like for you when it happened?
To be honest, I was really surprised that they were not Quentin Letts, obviously, because Quentin Letts wants to bring back the death penalty and drown witches and everything you can imagine, really. But I was surprised that Ian, particularly, was so utterly dismissive of what was going on. I was really, really disappointed. And one thing that happens when I'm angry is I'm really inarticulate and I tend to go, fuck, bollocks, that's a load of wank and piss. But I kind of somehow managed to control myself and put everything in the right order in the sentence. I'm not quite sure how. I possibly was on drugs, I don't know, I can't remember. But, yeah, and I just wanted to make the point, not in a kind of angry way, but I always think if you can express it in a fairly calm way, it has a bit more power to it, really.
It really does, doesn't it? Because you just take the emotion out of it and you say the facts as they stand, and it's much more difficult for them to go, oh, you're being hysterical, because you were really measured, really articulate, and I noticed that none of them interrupted you, and I was really surprised. But then Ian Hislop did say, oh, well, as you say, you're the only woman, so it's not really for us to say that's rubbish, which was big of him.
Yeah, well,
but it did, really
he did say, yes, he could have completely dismissed it. Because I was a senior charge nurse just before I left, I'd somehow kind of managed to get that authority. And every time I do Have I Got News, they're always a bit scared of me, I think. Oh. And I quite like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, perfect.
Yeah, OK, so I'm going to tell you my challenge as a sort of extension of this conversation now. I was interviewed because I was just doing a big tour, and there was an article written about me. A chap approached me and said he'd like to do an article, and he interviewed me. And when it came out, The opening was all about, there was an episode that we did about orgasms and about women having orgasms. And in the context of the podcast, that's a terrific, interesting thing to talk about, and we were really open about it. But this was in the Sunday morning supplement, and it opened with, I never dreamed I would open an interview by saying, I've just been listening to orgasms. And it felt very salacious to me. And then there was something that I didn't want to say, but it was about oversharing on the podcast. And I said, yeah, there's one thing that I've overshared. But I said very specifically, I'll tell you, but could you please not print it? Because I don't want it sort of all to kick off again. And he did. He said, oh, well, she said not to share it, but, I won't say exactly what it was, but I'll say, and sort of did share it.
In print, he said, I'm not supposed to be writing this. Wow.
And then said, he was asking me, there was a bit of stand-up I'd done about women and men masturbating on planes, and that the one thing about being a woman, if you're a cis woman, is that you can do it very discreetly, and men often get told off in business class, apparently, according to a friend of mine as a flight attendant.
They do tend to be a bit flamboyant about it, don't they?
Have you seen it, Joe? Have you witnessed that?
A man wanking.
No,
never.
No, on a plane, I mean.
On a plane. No, on a tube. Does that count? Yeah.
Oh, that's not okay.
Years ago when I was a student and I was going on my own into central London from Uxbridge because I was at Brunel, this guy came and sat down opposite me and he had a book over his area and the book started going up and down.
Oh, God!
I know, and I thought, this is so unpleasant. So I got up and walked down the carriage and there were only two other people in the carriage. It was a couple, and I said to them, do you mind if I sit here? Because there's a guy up there masturbating. And they got up and walked off as if I was mad.
That's not good allies, is it?
No.
You've got
the vision of filth with you.
You've got to be a good ally.
I had one, this is where, it was only a couple of weeks ago, where I was on my own in a train carriage, and a guy got on and there was no one else there, and he started getting his knob out, and I thought, God, I was staring like really angrily out the window, like, don't look at him. I think they want you to look at them, don't they? And
It's
then
like the chip shop all over again.
just mouth breathe through this. and then this is appalling. This maybe should have been a feminist butt, but then it turns out he wasn't having a wank, he's having a piss.
No!
And I was like, oh, is there anything worse? My first thought was,
London.
God, he's taken one look at me and decided he'd like a public piss.
Anyway,
yes.
I apparently, in this interview, he was asking me about this, and I sort of said, well, yeah, and I must have done a gesture and said, well, it's easier, it's more obvious if a guy's going like that. And in the interview, he says, anyone sitting at a nearby table, by the gesture she does, would think we weren't getting on, or maybe that we were getting on really well, which implies that someone sitting next to the table could have thought I was offering to sexually pleasure him. And I was just like, that was not what it was. And it just really upset me. And I wasn't going to do anything about it because I just thought, you get that feeling if you're lucky to be interviewed, you're lucky to be getting press, and don't make a fuss, just don't look at it and it'll go away. But it really bothered me, so I thought for this challenge I would say something. Because if I don't say something, then he does it again and he does it again and he just doesn't know. And I got the feeling that he was actually a nice chap, but that's, again, it's just part of the culture. Anyway...
I don't get that feeling.
No, I get the feeling.
At all, because you see, I mean, in some ways it's a fool's errand to say to a journalist, please don't print that, because that's like giving them an invitation to print it.
If he's that sort of journalist, which is
who was
an
it?
arse tit.
Please don't go after him.
I'm going after him now.
It's a New Zealand publication, and I was touring in New Zealand.
Oh, good. Holiday in New Zealand.
If you're listening at home, please don't go and find the article he wrote, because I don't want more clicks on it. And please don't write to him, because it doesn't matter. And I just don't want to escalate it. I did think it was worth me writing to him. I'd really prefer it if you didn't write to him, because I don't want it to kick off. So is that okay, everybody? Don't go and find it. I don't want it to suddenly get 10 million clicks. That's not a good idea. Anyway, he then wrote to me before the article came out and asked, because Weinstein happened, and he asked me for a quote about Weinstein. And so that was in the article. And I was like, what you don't get is this is Weinstein culture. You wouldn't write that about a man. You wouldn't say, oh, I wonder if the person at the next table thought that we were getting on really well. I just felt like it was so sexualised. And most of the interview had been all about, the podcast and feminism and that kind of thing. And it felt not right. So I wrote to him about it. And I said, look, I think this is Weinstein culture. I think these things are. And I won't, say everything I said or everything he said. But he replied, and he said, when you told me not to print it, I assumed you were doing a bit.
What?
Because he starts getting the transcript out and saying, you said this and you said that. So he actually gives a quote. So although you're recording this, I'd appreciate it if you didn't print it as you'll start it off again. And he writes, it seemed like you were doing a bit. How is that bit? That's not a funny bit. And then he says, your response to this article is exactly the kind of thing that makes intelligent, thoughtful men disengage from British American feminism. The constant, exhausting dissection of the minutiae of our interactions with women, which invariably typifies as variegated sex pests,
I want you to get this published.
Haunting some section of the Weinstein spectrum, the creation of terms like mansplaining, which I had not used, it's just obviously something
I'm
that
going
he
to
doesn't
mansplain to him that his bollocks are coming off.
I mean, you could just splain. And terms like mansplaining, which I hadn't used, so I assume it's just one of his bête noirs.
Well, don't use it, because apparently it's assaulting someone.
Yeah, it's putting men off feminism. And Weinstein culture, to umbrella infinitely complex modes of discourse, the selective recasting of women from confident dynamic beings to victims of manipulative cis-male journalists as it suits. And I thought, that's kind of who you are then. He says, are you seriously equating a subjective, salacious tone in one section of an article with the acts of a serial rapist? I know that you can argue that small actions matter and that this is all part of the spectrum of disrespect that feeds into a culture of misogynistic behaviour, but not all sins are equal. I'm like, but... yes, I didn't say you're Weinstein. I said this is part of Weinstein culture, the culture where women are always sexualised, where salacious things are written. And he disagrees that anything he wrote was salacious, and that's his point of view. But I found, he said at one point, Bisha K. Ali was with me when I was being interviewed. She just had turned up for the show and she was just hanging out with me. And I had said something like, we were talking about intersectionality and about the intersection of race and gender, and I said... something like, for example, if I were to, be attacked by a black man in an alley, he would win. But if I were to take a black man to court, I would probably win because I have, white woman respectability on my side. And so there are imbalances in terms of gender and race, and we have to understand the intersections of that. And Bisha said, rightly, evoking a black man in an alley attacking you, it sort of reinforces a stereotype. And I said, you're absolutely right, Bisha, it does. So if a black man were to try and take me in a fight, he would win. That's a better way of putting it. So I'd said that. And he sort of threw that up at me and said, this is from the transcript. What if Bisha had said to you, that's part of Confederate, American culture? And I was like, well, if I'd printed it and a black man had written to me and said that, I would say, you're absolutely right, I'm sorry. I haven't written back to him, but I just thought, no, that would also be... Yes, I would be wrong. And I would go, oh, of course, I didn't realise how that could affect you. I'm very sorry about that. But he couldn't see that. And he said, to get this email from an affluent, middle-class, Oxbridge-educated white woman. And he said, I only say that to you so you know how it feels when you call me a man. And I was like... And I was like it was an offensive thing. Like, when you say, you're judging me as a white man. And I was like, but I'm not offended by that because I am those things. That doesn't hurt me at all. I go, yeah, no, that's right. And that's why I have to be aware of my privilege. Because I do say things all the time on the podcast and people write to me and I go, okay, I see that, fair enough. And sometimes it is annoying. But you can't... It is. But I can't deny...
If you knew the amount of emails she got.
If I say, do you see what I mean? And I feel like he's just ignored the fact that I feel these things. Either I'm lying or I shouldn't feel them. That's what he's saying.
In a way, it feels like an extension of, I think, what probably Ian Hislop thought his argument was. Where he was saying, these things aren't that bad. And it's like, well, just because one of them is an accusation of someone having porn on their computer doesn't mean the other person... accusation was of being raped. It's about a culture.
That is what a culture is.
And actually, in terms of in the last Guilty Feminist about Weinstein and everything, one of the questions at the end was someone said, have you on the panel got any ideas of what we can do if men are sleazy to us at work and stuff like that? And there were loads of great suggestions, but my thought was exactly that. Could we not reclaim it and be like, all right, Harvey, if someone's touching our knee?
What do you recommend?
I think can't a Harvey become a slang term for someone who's in any way a little bit patronising or handsy or anything that encompasses the whole culture. In fact, the broader we make it, the less kind of I don't know. I feel like the more power we take from it.
I think the problem is well, obviously it's several-fold. But first of all, the issue with someone like Ian maybe is that he doesn't know what it's like to experience that, and he can't imagine what it's like to constantly be wary of what's someone going to say to me, because I don't know if you have that, but I certainly do. And I get a mixture of approaches, and one is someone that's nice to me initially, so they can then be horrible to me like 2 minutes down the line, you know. And also I get so many people appearing to be nice on the surface and then appearing to be underhand. And in a way, it's kind of sexual bullying, and it's expecting women to be so humiliated by it that they'll be kind of speechless and they won't know what to do. I mean, for example, just very briefly, I was comparing an advertising awards a couple of years ago, and this one advertising agency kept winning everything. I was gently taking the piss out of them, basically. And the CEO came up at the end to get the overall award. And I handed it over to him. And as he shook my hand, he said very quietly, "I always knew you weren't funny, but I never realised what a cunt you were."
Oh my God!
We're on stage in the Grosvenor House Hotel. It's really glittering.
Oh my
And
God!
then it was the end of the night, and I think he just thought I was going to carry that back with me. And so I thought, fuck that, that's really not on. So I said to the audience, thanks to everyone, you've all been great, apart from, then I said his name, and apart from him, because this is what he just said to me. And I told them what I said. They
Because he didn't think you would. He thought you'd go away and cry.
I would go away, and I'd be so humiliated that I'd been called a cunt by someone as marvellous as him. Because I wouldn't make a fuss. And actually, the audience, they were really, really shocked. And I think that's good that they were. But actually, what happened afterwards, that loads of people that worked for him came up and said to me, "No, he's the cunt." And he sounded like he was a really unpleasant boss to work for, particularly for women. He was just a bully, And I think the problem, the thing is, you've got to call people out at the time, and it's really hard to do because you are made to feel like a fool.
I felt really sick because this came back today, this email, and I did feel sick, and I thought, I wish I hadn't done this the night before the show. Like, now I've got to kind of go to the show, and I felt a bit punched because it was a very long email. It was much longer than that. It went into a lot of detail about what he'd been doing this weekend, including sort of interviewing a feminist who makes clitoris jewellery or something, and basically he runs with feminists all the time, and they're not like me. And I just felt it was really, really long. Mine was quite pithy. Mine was
Is he a feminist in the same way that Hugh Hefner was? It feels a bit like that, doesn't it?
It's not entirely clear to me, but I did feel a bit, when you get sort of something very aggressive and, basically saying it's people like you that put men off feminism. I'm like, well, if men are put off feminism by hearing anything that's about themselves personally and not about other men, then it's not feminism, is it? You never intended to be a feminist. You only wanted to play at feminism. And that's the same as if a person of colour says to me, you say you're an ally, but what about this? If I go, well, they're taking it too far. You're putting white people off Black Lives Matter now. It's no good. Like, you can't. And so it just did make me feel a bit sick. And I think that is the problem of calling these things when they happen. But I love your bravery of doing that. Did the organisers say anything about it? Were they kind of chuffed that you did it, or they didn't say anything at all?
I don't think so. I don't think they were chuffed, but, tough shit, really.
If I was a woman, I would think...
One hell of an organiser to be, really chuffed about that fucking controversial bit at the end.
I just imagine
it might have really upset one of the most wealthy and powerful people here.
I don't know why. I just suddenly imagined it was a female organiser.
Yeah, of course.
And I imagine if I was organising that, how thrilled I'd be. And of course, Hello, Guilty Feminists. This is Deborah Frances-White from The Guilty Feminist, briefly interrupting your podcast listening to let you know that The Guilty Feminist live shows are sold out now till the end of the year, but we're putting new ones on sale soon. In the meantime, you could come and see me at Global Pillage. There are a few tickets left for the November 18th show at King's Place at 4 p.m. on a Saturday. In the cast will be David Baddiel, Zoe Coombs-Marr, Athena Kablenu, Nat Atsima, Izzy Lawrence and Phil Wang. So please get tickets
tickets for that now. King's Place, November 18th at 4 p.m. A lovely matinee show. Also, you can come and see me in conversation at Standard Issue at Leicester Square Theatre in London, in conversation with Sarah Millican and some other fantastic women on the 14th of December. Get tickets now while you can. Come and say hi afterwards. And if you would like to listen to Loud Voices, which is our Guilty Feminist scripted project, then go to loudvoices.libsyn.com. And this week, could I direct you to Bisha K. Ali's Haunt Hunters, a half-hour scripted comedy about two paranormal investigators. And while you're there, you might like to listen to Dark Ages, which is a half-hour audio sitcom by me. Please check it out. And now back to the podcast.
Please welcome to the stage the fabulous Deborah Frances-White.
As those of you who've listened to last week's podcast know, luckily just before I went on stage, there was an open letter from the men of Hollywood released online, which I read out. And I am delighted to say that just 10 minutes before I came on stage tonight, the gentlemen of Westminster also released an open letter. It's just the timing is amazing. So I'd like to read it to you, because I think it's important that we do hear their response. We, the gentlemen of Westminster, are horrified to discover that sexual harassment has taken place in the hallowed halls of the House of Commons, an institution which evolved in the 13th century and welcomed women in at the earliest opportunity, which is to say 1919. All women had to do to get the vote was go through the usual constitutional procedures, plus a little light bombing, arson, imprisonment and hunger strikes. But it's good to jump through a few hoops so we know you're serious. And when you girls had made your point and served in all the traditionally male roles previously denied you with spirit and skill during World War I, and we didn't want all the business with the bombing and shrieking and throwing yourself under horses hysterically again to start up. So we gave the vote to all of you who are over 30 and married, that is to say, already owned by a chap, and already had a bit of dosh in the bank, while we gave it to all men who were men at the same time. To be utterly fair to us, we weren't in a position to give it to all of you, because otherwise, given the death toll from the war, you'd have outnumbered us. And more women than men isn't equality, is it? Equality is one woman on a panel. You've got a spot, and what are you complaining about? As long as the girl you put forward for the job can hold her end up and play like one of the boys, there really shouldn't be any fuss or bother. Anyway, so much has changed in the 99 years that you've been able to have a go at the whole voting malarkey. There are lady folk all over the house now. Sometimes you'd think it was Selfridges on a midweek afternoon, with all the handbags and chat and intoxicating perfume in the hallways. And many of us did anticipate this would cause problems with some of the more humorless ones. You can't put Harriet Harperson and some of the randier public school chaps in the same sack and shake them all about and not expect a hand on a knee to be misinterpreted by somebody. Having said that, some of the lasses are invaluable. As Charlie was saying just this morning, if his lovely PA didn't remember his wife's birthday, they'd be hell to pay. And what's feminism if it's not one girl remembering another girl's birthday to keep a chap out of trouble? It's important to remember that much of the sexual chatter that's gone on has been pretty low-level stuff. And if a 19-year-old lass doesn't want to receive sexual text messages when applying for a job, she should probably be a Girl Friday for one of the lady MPs. Andrea Leadson is looking for a new girl to release her confidential complaints. Maybe that would suit her better. Personally, most of us have avoided the debacle of not getting all worked up over our young helpers by employing our nieces or daughters. Which is where nepotism, often derided, can come in very handy. All in all, it might be better to stick to hiring chaps, which is what we said before 1918. After all, it was you who wanted to change things. Does that clear things up? If not, perhaps we can have a little drink in the House of Commons bar and discuss it further. Wear that low-cut blouse we like, won't you? The gentlemen of Westminster. gone through your career, Jo, is it recent that you've sort of started taking a stand on these things, or have you always been someone who's done that?
No, I feel like I've always been someone that's done that, you know. And actually, as a stand-up, there are some really, truly appalling kind of incidents in my life and in yours, I would imagine, because as soon as people get drunk, and especially at places like the Comedy Store, which has a very kind of macho element on a Friday night when you have stag nights, like guys just say and do the most appalling things, and not just that, it's threatening as well, you know. So I've always battled against it, and I've actually been hit a few times on stage.
Hit?
And, yeah.
Wow.
And had beer thrown over me, and that was, I had been slapped around the face as well, and that was because the guy that I directed my put down at, whose mates then laughed at him, was just so unable to deal with the fact that he'd been put down by a woman and everyone was laughing at him, that he resorted to violence, you know.
Fucking hell.
But that's why I think nearly all of it is about power. It's not really about sex. When it's sexual harassment, it's about them wanting to change you. And that's what I always think about if someone catcalls or somebody...
Or slags off your appearance.
Shouts at you or any of those things. They want to see a change in you. So my response is always to get really breezy and businesslike. If a man sexually harasses me in the street, my comeback is, well, that's a terribly kind offer and I'll keep it in mind. And that seems like...
How does that work?
It sort of flattens them. It's like they've offered me Tupperware. And it hasn't changed me. It hasn't affected me. I haven't got angry, so they can't call me a bitch and a whore. I haven't gone, oh, no. I haven't said anything that might be like a flirt so they can continue. I've just basically said, what you've said, I don't want, but it hasn't affected me, it hasn't changed my day. And I think it's the same in the club. But in the club, you've got the microphone. And what the story Jess told is a similar story, that it's the fury of a woman in charge.
He was shaking with rage, and he was, that guy was a foot away from me, and I was like, he's going to hit. But I didn't feel that scared of that. Wasn't a huge guy, but I thought what I really thought was going to happen is this is where he's going to call me something horrible about what I look like or whatever. Like, this is where that's going to come in, and then the whole thing of the rest of my time up here is going to have to be about him. And actually, in a way, almost one of your jobs on stage when that happens is to deal with it in a way that's hopefully funny as well. I mean, that added layer of that. Yeah, but I find the longer I'm in stand-up, the less of a fuck I give whether the response is funny, if it shuts it down. And actually now I probably, depending on my mood, give it a few goes, getting it all finished and quietened with humour, and then actually be like, do you want to fuck off?
Yeah, I don't think there's any shame in just going, oh, fuck this, and walking off. I mean, I did
We've got Christmas coming up.
And, exactly, bollocks, can't be bothered. But I did Jongleurs once years ago, and there was a lovely table of dentists who were on a stag night, right? And they were really, really pissed. And at one point, one of them stood on the table, got his cock out, and just shouted, suck my cock, you fucking bitch. And I just said, oh, for fuck's sake, I can't be arsed with this. And I walked off, right? And the guy that ran the place at the time said to me, you've come off 2 minutes early, I'm going to drop your pay. No. How supportive. Thank you.
No. They've just gone bust, by the way.
A dentist, did you say?
A dentist.
It really surprises me that a dentist would do that.
Why?
I just would think a more sophisticated heckle. I just think... it seems very...
Oh, God, once they've had a few pints.
Jess, do you have a challenge that you want to do?
I did do a challenge. I heard the last podcast, some brilliant MeToo stuff. I'd already done some MeToo stuff on Facebook and joined in. I want this to lead to real change. I had 2 really notable instances ever of MeToo for me, and I found out contact details for both of them and got in touch with them and told them what I remember. One of them responded with possibly the kindest, most compassionate response I could possibly have ever dreamed of, saying thank you for bringing it to his attention.
Do you mind if I forward it to this journalist? Just sort of say, this
honestly,
is more what I was hoping for.
Genuinely, this guy saying, you're right, I don't remember anything of that. Let's lead this to change. If you want to keep on talking about it, fine. If you don't, just know that I take full responsibility, even though I don't remember a thing. Like, wow.
Well, that's great. Because I think calling it, whether or not they write back and say, you've ruined feminism for everyone, like in my case, or they write back saying, I take full responsibility and, I'll think that's
To be honest, I wouldn't have cared if neither of them... I mean, I'd actually desperately hope the other one doesn't get in contact. I think there's a situation with these things where everyone's got so many instances of stuff happening to them that wasn't cool. So like you said in that last podcast about saying not cool, I just wanted to say to them both not cool, because I think there's so much stuff in the culture that I was in my teens and 20s. I think so many things happen to people that one party in those instances won't even remember it because they were so hammered. And I think that's a culture that's going to change. I've got a tiny toddler son, and I really hope, actually, that this means that this huge waves of stuff that are happening now, I hope it carries on and builds, and that by the time he's my age, that his generation won't have as many stories like this, because they'll just be so much more aware of how you do or don't behave with other people.
Yeah, I feel it is changing. Do you feel it's changing, Jo? Do you feel it's...
yeah, very much so. I mean, I've got 2 daughters who are 15 and 16, and the way that they don't put up with any shit compared to how things were when I was at school just is fantastic, and that seems to be across the board with them. They go to like a very normal kind of secondary school, and there are kind of issues of some boys kind of just treating the girls there really badly, but there's a huge kind of raft of girls who just won't have it, and I think good for them.
Yeah. Amazing.
And
it's brilliant.
Do you feel you're able to kind of take all of the wisdom from your life? I would say psychiatric nursing and stand-up comedy are 2 of the most extreme sports you can enter into. And the fact that you've managed to do both and be very successful in both, have you been able to kind of package what you know and give it to them? Do you think that's one of the reasons they don't take any shit, is that you've taught them not to?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it is. But also, I think it's just a general kind of change in society, really. And I think what's so powerful for them, despite the fact that everyone says, there are sort of awful elements to it, is online social networking and all that sort of thing. Because I think what's great now is that women feel they have a collective voice because they can get in touch with each other in a way that we couldn't,
Completely. And we can tell each other, we can warn each other, and I think that's what this podcast is. It's like an army of women. And I think a lot of the success of the podcast is, in fact, not to take anything away from us, but it's the audience. Because people at home hear the audience laughing. It's true. And that sounds like an army to them. And it sounds like, other women, every time they laugh, other women recognise it. Oh, I'm not the only one. So if you're being sexually harassed at work, a woman wrote to me and said, I listened to the podcast and I listened to certain episodes over and over to give myself the courage to go to HR, and I took all the emails my boss had been writing me for a year or 2, sexually harassing me, and handed them in. I got the courage up to do it. But she said I wouldn't have got the courage up without the podcast. And I honestly think if this was the 3 of us in a studio, without that audience going, us too, that is what the power of it is. Anyway, she went in and he got suspended immediately.
Oh, that's fucking brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, really is.
What do you think we can do collectively? It's not women's job to solve sexual harassment, clearly. But what are things that we can do to kind of take power now it's come to the fore in the way that it has?
Well, the issue that I've always had, the 2 groups I'm interested in are women who kind of side with this sort of, it's all very trivial and what are they making a fuss about? That group of women. But also the group of men who you would assess as kind of decent human beings who just stand by and let the raft of men at the top who behave really badly do that without saying anything. And to me, they're the ones that you need to motivate, and get them going. So I think if there was some sort of drug you could inject into them...
I'm not sure Rohypnol is the answer to sexism, in a way.
No, I'm thinking more
kind of new kind of like compassion serum.
But also PMT serum as well, that would make them kind of want to defend women a bit more. I was surprised by Ian, because I think if Ian was in a scenario where that was going on, he wouldn't allow it to carry on, and he wouldn't think it was okay. He would do something, And yet he was on TV saying, it's all a fuss about nothing.
Low level, yeah.
Yeah.
Has he said anything since to you? Do you think he sort of recognised that wasn't
No, I mean, after the show, it's all a bit blah, 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 and, someone goes, can you say hello to my mum, and can I have a picture for my auntie whose hair fell out and stuff like that, and it's all... So you never really get a chance to... That's not true. It's just an example. But, you don't get a chance to kind
But
of
he hasn't
have
texted you or anything like that?
No, he hasn't, no.
And said, I saw it went a bit viral. Yeah, well done,
yes,
you.
I've seen the light. No, he hasn't, no.
He hasn't had his road to Damascus moment.
And that whole thing I can't bear is that, haven't you got a sense of humour?
Oh, yeah.
No, I haven't, about someone grabbing my arse, weirdly,
No, completely.
It's that
okay
thing, and I think it's what you did, it's what you're describing. I think it's that taking the time to explain. Even like you did in that email, like you did on that show.
Like you did when you wrote to those guys. It's sort of
even
having
if
the
they
courage
don't
to
listen,
speak
and that's
out,
how you crack those groups. That's like I have a friend's mum who was like, well, if they wanted to get cast in those films, you do what you got to do. And you're like, I think you think you're being funny, but it's hot, but unless you stop and explain, no, I'm not going to laugh at that, because think about what you're saying. Like, unless you engage with these people, take that time, even if they're not going to listen to, if every time they say something like that, there's someone there who tries to engage them in a constructive explanation or conversation about it, then eventually something has to sink in.
I do think it's nice on occasion to make the grand gesture, though. I once got shouted at out of a white van, my fave, when I was shopping in Oxford Street. 3 young guys in a white van, oh, fuck off, you fat loser, all this sort of thing. And I just, fuck it. And I just went and ripped their windscreen wipers off. They'll remember that, I don't do that very often. Because
now, normally I would say the Guilty Feminist does not endorse a destruction of property, but on this occasion I would say it does. Jessica Fostekew, do you have anything to plug?
Yes, I'm going on tour in February, March-ish 2018 with my show The Silence of the Nans. I'm starting a podcast called Hoovering, about eating. Look out for that early next year, 2018. And my Twitter is @Jessica Fostekew.
Can Joe and I come on that? Because that sounds like right up our
begging
streets.
you.
I'm making an assumption there, but I want to go on any podcast
too.
about food. Yes, please. Me
Will
too.
there be food?
There will be food.
Well,
Right, let's go.
Yes, absolutely. Joe, do you have anything you'd like to plug?
Oh, I've got a film coming up, actually.
Oh, fancy.
Matron. And I wrote the script from the novel, what I wrote as well. And it's been knocking around for donkey's years, right? And it was originally commissioned by the BBC. And would you believe the woman that commissioned it moved on, and the man that moved into her job didn't like it. So, we got rid of it.
Huge surprise.
So it has actually finally been made. And it's coming out in January. It's called The More You Ignore Me. It's about 2 women in the same family that are obsessed with the Smiths. It's set in the 1980s, and it really centres around kind of rural poverty and mental health issues. It's a comedy. And
I'm looking forward to that. And is that on telly or a cinema?
no, it's at the cinema.
Oh, the cinema. We'll have to have a Guilty Feminist outing to that. So,
it's starring Sheridan Smith, who's
brilliant.
fantastic in it.
I was just going to ask who's in
Absolutely.
it. Okay, great. Are you in it at all?
Yes, but people think I'm in it because I demanded to be in it, and I elbowed a proper actor out of the way, and I really didn't, because they asked me, the director said, can you change this character who's a man to a woman and play her? And I said, okay. Weirdly, this woman is an ex-psychiatric nurse working as a newsagent, so it's a bit of a stretch.
But you're a proper actor. You were in Getting On.
Yeah.
That's not proper acting.
It was definitely proper acting. I thought it was a brilliant show.
I always thought of it as EastEnders acting, where you just play yourself and you can't play anything else.
I'm excited. So the movie is called
The More You Ignore Me.
The More
Amazing.
You Ignore Me, and it's out in January. Mm-hmm. And if you tell us, we will say on the podcast where we're all going to go on the opening weekend, because that's
Brilliant,
that's
I will.
what
Amazing.
makes it extend.
Something to
isn't
look
it?
forward to in January.
Yes, and look, so few women get to make films. There's so few women write screenplays that get made. Loads of women write screenplays, but due to horrendous sexism and the patriarchy,
really quickly, can I just say the second series of Damned, which is about social workers, is coming out in January as well, and that had 2 female writers, a female director, and a female producer. So
Wow.
we're really
Amazing.
Wonderful. Okay.
I'm writing both down.
And I should say a male writer, or Will be angry with me and he'll bring me out. But
Do you know
you stay
what?
good.
We've said enough about male writers. You're fine. You have been listening to The Guilty Feminist with me, Deborah Frances-White, guest co-host Jessica Fostekew, and our very special guest, Jo Brand. The recording engineer was Chris Sharp. Music was by Mark Hodge. Producer was Tom Selitsky for The Spontaneity Shop. Thanks to Zoe, Jacob, Sally, and everyone at King's Place, as well as all of you for listening. For more information about this and other episodes, visit guiltyfeminist.com.
I absolutely can't wait for the letter from the gentleman of Hogwarts.
That would be great. I'm not Harry Potter enough to do it.